So I'll go ahead and call our next panel up here, and while they're coming up, I'll introduce Teresa Hawley, who will be leading this panel. So I told you this morning that Laura Johns was somebody that I wanted to clone, and Teresa Hawley is another person that falls into that category, so that I could just spread her wisdom across the country. Teresa is head of the Illinois Governor's Office of Early Childhood. She led the development of Illinois' successful Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge application and is now leading in that implementation. She always seems to be about 10 steps ahead of everyone else in her thinking and strategizing, and is one of the first people I look to for input and feedback on new ideas. I'm so pleased to welcome her to the stage to talk about this next important topic, effective teaching and learning, and it fits so well as a follow-up to some of Linda's comments as well around professional development in the workforce. So thanks, Teresa.
Well, good afternoon, and I'm so excited. We're going to just sit here and try to make this as informal as possible and kick off our conversation. I'm so excited to talk about this very important topic of improving early childhood teaching and learning. Our goal of this session is to just have a discussion about what does it really take to have excellent instruction in a preschool classroom, and how do we build quality improvement systems that are going to produce that level of excellent instruction consistently across the tens of thousands of preschool classrooms we have in this country, whether they're in Head Start, state-funded preschool, child care centers, private preschool programs, whatever their auspice, how do we ensure that we have excellence across the board? So as Jerry said, I'm in the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, and we're with the help of our Early Learning Challenge grant funding. We're working diligently with our partners in the State Board of Education, our Department of Human Services, and many public and private sector partners to transform our early learning system, especially for those children who are most at risk of arriving at kindergarten ill-prepared to engage in the kind of rigorous curriculum they're going to need in order to be prepared to be part of the 21st century workforce. So I'm going to start our discussion by providing an overview of the issue at hand, and then we'll have a brief presentation by each of our presenters, followed by some discussion about the topic. So I'd like to start just with a really quick overview of kind of our research about what is quality in early learning settings. And but just a brief aside, today we're going to be focusing primarily on the preschool age classrooms, although a lot of what we're going to be talking about really does apply to infant toddler classrooms as well as classrooms that serve kids from kindergarten through 3rd grade. So what has the research taught us about what matters? What constitutes high quality? And I'm sure you're aware that we have a long history to draw upon here. If you look back at the beginnings of our research on quality in childcare and early learning, back in the 1970s, we focused a lot on the structural features of quality, those things we can regulate, group size, ratios, teacher qualifications. And we learned that that does matter, but its explanatory power was fairly modest. In the second wave of early childhood research, the focus turned more to process features, the learning environment, the quality of materials in the room, the structure of the day, things like that. That added to our explanatory power, but again, falls short of really being able to explain the difference between high quality and less high quality settings. More recently, there's been a wave of research really looking at teacher-child interactions and the degree to which those are supportive of children's social, emotional, language, and cognitive development. And again, that's helping to add explanatory power. And finally, there's now emerging a new focus on the actual content of instruction. So this is where we're seeing all the emphasis on math instruction, science instruction in the preschool classroom, and what does that mean for how we build excellence in instruction. So we've had a long history of research that's brought us to today. And our evolution, our understanding has evolved rapidly in terms of understanding what it takes to produce high quality in early childhood classrooms. So we've had a lot of research, a lot of development efforts over the past decade or so. Early Reading First grants over a period of a decade taught us a lot about what it takes to raise up the quality of instruction in classrooms. a wave of research and implementation efforts around coaching and mentoring and embedded professional development, research on teacher-child interactions, and most recently, the research on implementation science that helps us understand how do you take what we see as best practice and start to bring it to scale in programs. All of this has helped to feed our understanding of what should be happening in preschool classrooms and how do we get there. And I just want to offer this as a little illustration of just how rapidly changes have been happening in the field of preschool education. So this timeline here with teaching strategies from their catalog, it shows you the evolution of a really popular curriculum, the creative curriculum, from its development in the 1970s to what's happening today. And you see back in the 1970s and really throughout most of its history, it was focused primarily on the environment, the learning environment in the classroom, setting up learning centers, how is the day structured, what materials do you have in the classroom. But in just the last few years, there's been a really big shift towards looking at content within the curriculum. So in the words of one of my favorite early childhood thinkers, my fellow Illinoisan Tom Lehman, for 30 years, we've been telling early childhood teachers that their primary responsibility is to set up an effective learning environment and a good structure for the day. And all of a sudden, we're saying to them, oh, yeah, and you have to teach the children, too. So a big gap remains between what we know and what we do in early childhood teaching and learning. So we know that what we need is content-rich curriculum and instruction that's really tied to high-quality learning standards. But what we have typically and too often is weak curriculum that's only very loosely tied to learning standards. What we know is that we need to have intentional teacher-child interactions and individualized instruction within classrooms that meet children where they are and help to develop them according to the standards. But what we really do and what we see in classrooms too often is a lot of large group instruction, poor use of free play time, and very limited or small group or one-on-one interactions between teachers and children. And what we know we need are language-rich classrooms that build up children's vocabulary and concept development, but what we see are few enriching conversations between teachers and children or even among children. So how do we bridge this gap? This is just a little sampling of what we're trying to do in Illinois to look at this. We have included preschool instructional excellence in our highest levels of our quality rating and improvement system and have intentionally focused on that in our award of excellence categories. We're supporting leaders across the state in helping to give them the skills for doing embedded professional development, coaching, and mentoring for the teachers that are in their programs. And we are giving grants to higher ed institutions to help them rethink how they're training teachers for being in early childhood classrooms so that they have the skills to do the kind of instruction we want them to do. So, as our panel today is going to share with you a few thoughts of how they're addressing improving instructional excellence. And I'm only going to offer a brief introduction to the panelists because you have their full biographies in your program. So we'll start with Marie Enochty, who is at the Boston Public Schools. Marie has a wealth of experience in early childhood, including developing and implementing professional development efforts and supports for programs seeking NAEYC accreditation. She co-wrote the Massachusetts Infant Toddler Standards and Guidelines and has long focused on issues of diversity, equity, and closing the achievement gap in her work with principals, directors, and teachers. She will share with us today some lessons from Boston on how they have strengthened instruction in their preschool program and link this to improvements in K-3 education in their district. Next, we'll hear from Gail Joseph, who is an associate professor in the area of educational psychology at the University of Washington and serves as the faculty director of early childhood and family studies there. She's the director of SEQUEL and the National Center for Quality Teaching and Learning. SEQUEL has just too many words to spell out. It's in your program. And she will talk to us about her efforts to transform early childhood teacher preparation and professional development to support excellent instruction. And finally, we'll hear from Sharon Ritchie, who's the director of First School at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And her 35 years in the field has included long experiences as a teacher, program director, teacher educator, and researcher. And among her many projects is co-writing the self-study materials for NAEYC accreditation. Her current focus in First School is on pre-K to third grade public school reform to support school success, particularly for African American, Latino, and low-income children. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Marie to help get our conversation started.
Thank you. Aloha. I come from the community-based Head Start model of preschool and then entered the world of public school about 3 years ago on a full-time basis, and it's been an eye-opening and gratifying experience, but at the same time, I feel like I have a foot in each camp. So I'm going to speak today a little bit about the background of how Boston came to be in their preschool world, but it's also the connectors between kindergarten and now the first through third grade model that we are excited to be entering as we push our work forward. Yes, Massachusetts is #1 in the recent Kids Count report, but you know, we do not rest on our laurels. We know we have a lot of work to do in Massachusetts, and we continue to try to close the improvement gap in such a big system like Boston. So a little bit about the history. In 2005, Mayor Menino really made it important that pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, known as K0 and K1, was going to happen in Boston Public Schools. He's always been a leader in early childhood education, and he's recently left. We have a new mayor as of last year. They created the Department of Early Childhood, which is now up to 15 people and mirrors the practice that we hope to reflect in our schools, which is that we really have a diversity and inclusion in our hiring practices. And it's probably the first time in the history of my 35+ years in education where I've been I have colleagues that mirrors the diversity of how it should look when we teach children in our school systems or in our early childhood systems. In 2006 to 2009, we had a tremendous focus on quality improvement. They decided they were going to open up preschool programs with 1 teacher and 25 children and thought it could be taught like kindergarten with no problems, and realized because of the early childhood department push that no, you can't do that. You needed to have a full-time assistant teacher, which is how it's, and it started that way in 2005 and has continued. So there's always been that push that you can't just open up preschool programs, that the quality has to be connected to it. So the current, as I'm going to call them from now on, K1 programs, has 2,300 seats for 4-year-olds. I'll go back to this piece about funding in a minute because that's tied to our NAYC accreditation. But we're in 85% of the 78 elementary schools. And this year we're increasing that by 12 more classrooms because of our new mayor's initiative to continue to push the envelope around 4-year-olds. It's free for parents, but it's a lottery, as is in the entrance into kindergarten in Boston Public Schools. So that's important to notice also. They're not neighborhood schools. You can move into a community in Boston that's up and coming with a very good, high-quality elementary school across the street from where you live, and you're not guaranteed that your child will be enrolled in that school because of the busing issue in Boston and the ways that they've tried to address equity over the years. So the preschool program follows the same thing. So the children are, it's totally lottery and choice. But it's a full day, and the ratios are 22 to 2. And it's also really important to know that the salary scale for the K1 teachers is the same as the salary scale for the K through 12 world. And in Boston, the average salary is $80,000 a year for a public school teacher. But on the flip side, because of our teacher unions, that means that we have to follow the same teacher contract as the K through 12 world. And so they have to be licensed, they have to have passed the MTELs, they have to have their teacher certification. And sometimes when we get a third or fourth grade teacher who would like to retire in a year and think it's a retirement job, we have to fight against the waters of the union to have a teacher placed in a K1 classroom who's never taught young children before. So there's good and bad to that, and I'll get to that later. So some of the things that we've done, we've invested in coaching and mentoring as part of our professional development. We've implemented very specific curriculums around literacy and math, OWL and building blocks. It was important that there was consistency across all these schools. And we've also piloted NAYC accreditation as a way to move quality up and through the ranks, which is a 3-year model, which is where the coaching and mentoring comes in. And that's where the monies come in through private funding. It was all mandated, but there was no extra funding for this to roll out. So open up a classroom, but how are you going to fund it? So we provide about $6,000 per classroom for materials and supplies, you know, lots of those kindergarten classrooms, and then they thought for preschool we're going to look like the desks and chairs. So that now we have 25 NAYC accredited schools, and we have one more in the waiting, and the idea is we're in over 35 schools right now in terms of NAYC accreditation, and that's how we've been pushing this whole piece about quality. So it's not just the curriculum, but it's the coaching and mentoring that goes hand in hand. We also created principal trainings that wasn't just a year, it was over a year's fellowship. The initial one was funded through private funding with the Kale Institute, with Valora Washington, who's here in the audience, who really took all these principles and gave them a really in-depth support around early childhood and why it was important. Kindergarten principals are looking at some K-8 schools, and that was really important. Being asked to push it through. So what we've done this year, we don't have the capacity to reach the needs of every 4-year-old in Boston. We wanted to do some partnering with community-based programs. We got another grant to bring in 10 community-based partners that had to apply for an RFP. There's 14 classrooms and 200 children right now in this program after we've just finished we're going into 2.5 years into this program. The money that the programs got, which was up to $50,000, was only to be used for salary enhancements for those teachers and assistant teachers in those classrooms. They got the OWL and the building block curriculum, coaching and mentoring, and the ability to join in our professional development. But the monies that they got for the programs were totally for salary enhancement. The issue is that no way did that bring that salary enhancement up to what meets the public school model, but we're talking about community-based programs where the teachers had to have a bachelor's and they had to be in a program that was NAYC accredited. So this is just kind of one of the models of how we're looking at all the things that need to be in place. We talked about yesterday we talked about the three-legged stool. It has to have the coaching and mentoring and the curriculum, but it also has to have some kind of, the salaries have to be there. It's not just about giving teachers all this support without giving them some kind of ways to think about how this is going to move along. Because, and I didn't get into the data, of which I have a ton of, if anyone knows my boss, Jason Sachs, is a data man, but the reason why we get all our funding from the private sector is because we have data to back it up that shows that children that have been enrolled in our K-1 programs do much better in 1st and 2nd grade. What happens is that we see the drop-off by 3rd or 4th grade because kids are being taught drill and kill. So we have just received funding this past year for the next 4 years to roll out a brand new 1st and 2nd grade curriculum. We've rolled out a kindergarten curriculum that's looking at the model of center-based with collaboration, creativity, really pushing. We used the Common Core as our reason for doing this, that kindergarten had to look different. It was to integrate all the subject matters, and of course we've been doing it with preschool forever. Why don't we do it in kindergarten? We're about to roll out the rest of our kindergarten classrooms this year, which is what I'm going back to. And starting next year, we're going to start to develop 1st and 2nd grade curriculum based on our kindergarten model, which was based on our pre-K model, and start to roll out the change in frame of thinking and teaching around 1st and 2nd grade teachers in the next couple of years before we roll out the curriculum. So it really, it's exciting work. It's exciting work. So lessons. High quality preschool can be achieved at scale, but it takes extra funding. And we have so much. We have a website that has everything from the formula, from the budgets, from the RFPs that we did to work with the community-based programs, to every PowerPoint that we've done for every national and international program that's come in, and all of our data points and studies. We have so much to back what we do, which is how we get our funding. So thank you.
All right, is this one on? Can you hear? Great. Well, I knew I didn't want to follow Sharon, and now I'm sad that I'm following Marie. So I'm Gail Joseph. I'm at the University of Washington and work in a couple of these centers. And I want to talk about some innovations in higher education. And before I do, I just have to tell a story. Those of you who know me know I always have to tell a child story. So let me just tell this one really quick, and I'll try and keep us on time. So there was a point a couple of years ago that in my house, in my family, we were talking a lot about savings for college. And most of the talk was about we should probably get on that because we have a couple of kids and we haven't done anything. So we were talking about, what we're going to do and what program we should do and whatever. And we're talking about, and we've heard of families that have, engaged their children, that, a portion of, if they got some birthday money, that goes in their college savings account. And if they have allowance, that goes in their college savings, that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot of talk about college savings, all that stuff. So it was a little while later, and I was in the car with my daughter where all great conversations happen, right? And I hear my daughter say, she's 8 at the time, and I hear her say, "Mom, how will I pick a college?" And I'm like, oh my God, like every parent wants to hear that, right? How will you pick a college? So I said, well, honey, it really depends on what you're interested in then, right? So if you're still interested in fashion and design, we'll find a college that focuses on, fashion and design. And if you're still interested in becoming a vet and helping save animals, then we'll find a college that has classes in biology. And she said, wait a minute, is college school? And so she did not want any part of her birthday money going to that. Okay, so when I think about that story, I think there are some, there's some kind of assumptions, some implied pieces there. There's an assumption that she could afford to go, right? We're talking about savings. There's an assumption that she could move to wherever it is that she needed to go to get this degree. And there's also an assumption that there would be some relevancy in the coursework, right? That the coursework she would be taking would be relevant to her interests, relevant to her future career. And there's also an implication there that the coursework that she took would be effective, that it would actually improve her skills. It would make her have the skills to be able to save animals, for example. And so I think about those are the issues when I think about the early learning workforce and higher education. It's really about working on access and affordability. But the work that I've really been trying to focus on is also around the relevancy of the coursework and the effectiveness. Can I actually change and improve teacher-child interactions through higher education coursework? So that's some of the work we've been doing at the National Center on Quality Teaching and Learning, which is funded by the Office of Head Start. In very short, I'll tell you that we've worked really hard with national experts across the country to develop 13 comprehensive college courses based on the latest science about how to optimize child outcomes across developmental domains. And our intention with that coursework is to make it available to 2- and 4-year colleges and universities that would like to adopt part or all of those courses. So I want to talk about how the coursework might be different. So besides being based on the latest science, we also have taken what we call the intentional teaching framework to all of the courses. And this is where things might be a little bit different than what we typically do in higher ed. So to put briefly, the intentional teaching framework is know, see, do, improve. So within each of these courses, what we want students to do is we want them to know the child development information, and evidence-based teacher-child interaction practices that are important across domains. So we want them to know it, and they would get that through engaging lectures and lots of video examples of what it looks like in practice. But the second piece that we found to be pretty critical is this C part. So you know it. So maybe you know that print referencing is a good strategy to support early literacy, but I want you to watch videotapes of different teachers reading to young children, and I want to understand if you can identify if it's happening, when it's happening, and the quality of that interaction when it's happening. So you can think about this as an inter-rater reliability test, if you will. And part of why that's important is because I want to know that when I say print referencing, for example, or using novel words, that we're thinking the same thing. So we call this in the coursework, do you see what I see? Okay, this is what I see, do you see this? And we have ways to kind of quiz students on this piece. And then once I'm assured that everyone in the course sees what we see, that we've honed our definitions, that we really understand what the practices are, then I want you to reflect back on your own practice. So in our program, we have students submit a baseline video when they enter into the early childhood program. They submit a baseline video, and every time we teach them a new skill or practice, they go back and watch that baseline video, and they identify if they were doing it, when they were doing it, and the quality of that. The next part then is to enact that practice. So their homework, their applied homework, is to go to your, in your Head Start program, in your military child care, in your family child care, in the program you're volunteering in because you're hoping to go into early learning as a profession. So both pre-service and in-service teachers who are pursuing degrees, the homework is for you to enact these skills and then upload videos for your peers, a small group of your peers, to see and give you feedback, as well as the instructor, the content expert instructor. And then the next piece is to improve the skills. And so the final kind of assignment is a video portfolio that demonstrates their best quality of these skills across these different developmental domains. So what's kind of different here is that we've really transformed the professor's role. So I spend a lot of my time not grading papers or midterms. I find my time is spent that I'm being a coach. So I'm watching their videos, I'm providing feedback to their feedback. So I'm coaching them. And so essentially what we've done is we've been able to create some courses and a frame in which early learning professionals who are currently in the workforce, who are going back and getting degrees or seeking degrees, that they are now getting college credit for being coached in the workplace by content experts in these areas. And so that's been pretty fun. And I have just a few minutes, so I'm going to go through these next slides very quickly. I'm just going to show you we've been field testing. So again, all of these courses we're hoping to disseminate. We've been running a field test at the University of Washington where we've been able to offer a low-cost bachelor's completion degree that's completely online. So a lot of you might be skeptical about what we can do online, but maybe I can convince you. So in our pilot, essentially, one of the courses I'm going to talk about is Engaging Interactions and Environments, which is the foundation of the NCQTL House framework, as well as the state in Washington's early learning, our QRS framework standards. So engaging interactions and environments, students attend because they are online, so they watch engaging lectures online. They do a video reliability test to make sure that when I say using novel words, that they understand what that means and can identify it. They reflect on their baseline and say, did I use novel words when I was reading with young children? Did I provide a child-friendly definition to that word? Or not, so they see it and they reflect on it. Then we create these small communities of reflection and practice. We call them their cores. And so anytime they upload a video of themselves trying the skill, it's automatically disseminated to that core. Their core provides them with feedback, and then I drop in, or the professor drops in and provides not only feedback to the core on their feedback, but also to the student on their feedback. And then the last thing they would do is create, along the way, a final video portfolio. So here's just the no part. It's an engaging lecture that they watch. The C part is they reflect on their baseline videos. So we've created this tool called the Coaching Companion Campus Edition, and it's also developed open source and will be available for people that would like to use it. They watch their baseline videos, they reflect on it. They submit a reflection. Sometimes they're very lengthy here. I'm sure you're not able to read all that, but essentially she starts at the top saying, when I look back at these movies, and then, you know, at the end she says, and this is how I can't wait to now try the new skills because I didn't do it before. Then they do it, they upload their videos, and I've blacked out a lot of the students' names, but they upload their videos, it's shared with their community of reflection and practice. Then it looks kind of like this little YouTube video, so they upload their video, and then their peers comment on their interaction. I love this one because she's actually talking about how she decided to, she's working on using novel words, embedding novel words with a child-friendly definition. So she talks about how she was reading a story and the word was tower, so she defined it. And in her reflection here, she says that now children stop her all the time and ask her to define words, right? She had never done that before, so imagine the difference. And that this one little girl, when her dad came to pick her up, she said, "Dad, you tower over me." And then you see that the comments that the peers are giving at this point are not, they're really supportive, but they're not really coach quality. This is an example of what the professor gives as feedback to each of their videos. We start with a positive observation, we connect something to the course, we give a suggestion for improvement, and we end with an encouraging end. We want students to move to this in terms of reflecting on each other, and we're getting close. So this is just, this is my last slide, I promise. So in 3 months, this was the first student's she posted, she's commenting on one of her peers' videos, and the first entry there is in January, if you look at the date stamp. In January, this is typical of what their comments were. It was focused on the activity or the child, sometimes on what they were wearing, cute boots. So that's where their comments were. But we provide comments on their comments, feedback on their comments. And now look, 3 months later, with a new group of peers, so it's not just that I got to know you better so I can give you some real stuff. Her comment is coach quality. Her comment looks a lot like what the instructors do. And now they're able to really rely on each other to give them supportive and great feedback that helps move them to improve practice. And so we're able now to look at the baseline videos, their final video portfolios, have other people look at those and code those and say, yeah, you've done it. You've effectively improved that, that teacher interaction. Thank you very much.
That is great stuff. I'm Sharon Ritchie. I have the pleasure of talking about our last 10 years of working on First School. The faces of these young boys let us know that they have already repeatedly received messages that school is not the place for them, that they don't belong, and they're not valued or valuable. These messages are powerfully evident in their isolation within their own classrooms, in discipline, their overrepresentation in discipline, referrals, special education, retention, suspension, expulsion, and in their overattendance in schools and programs of low quality and low resources. They are equally underrepresented in programs that respond to their gifted potential and support their success in high school, college entry, and college success. For dropout prevention to actually start early, we need to examine the minute-by-minute experiences of these boys to illuminate the microaggressions they suffer and to shift the responsibility from their shoulders and those of their families to the institutions that have not sufficiently questioned practice and policy on their behalf. We've been observing in classrooms for African American, Latino, and children who come from disadvantaged homes for several decades. We see the same patterns everywhere. Inconsistent experiences, a predominance of teacher talk, and expectations of silence and compliance, none of which serve these children very well. As children move from pre-K into the K-12 system and are trying to figure out just what is this thing called school, we see that they experience a decrease in positive climate, an increase in negative climate, decreased sensitivity, and more importantly, a lack of regard for who they are as individuals, who they are culturally, racially, what they know, what they think, and what they feel. It's interesting that the work that children do in their 0 to 5 programs is learn to negotiate space, materials, and relationships. And yet, not too often, but almost always often, as they move into the kindergarten classroom, that the work they've done to learn how to self-regulate and develop autonomy is replaced by whole group and teacher control, and a lot of time where they are expected to manage their learning on their own, usually in the form of worksheets. There's been a lot of good work done in professional development in literacy. And we see this here in terms of increased amount of time with eyes on text, with a better balance between whole language and phonemic awareness. But at the same time, we see something so pervasive that we have come to call it a culture of silence, where no matter what state, what district, what school we're in, we see an average of 28 minutes a day that is dedicated to any kind of meaningful conversation between children and their teachers. Intentional vocabulary development is virtually non-existent. Again here, we see the power of professional development in literacy. The teachers are more able to scaffold their learning in literacy instruction, more able to ask open-ended questions and find out what they're learning and what they're taking in. But invariably, when we ask them why their math and literacy teaching approaches are so different, they will say, well, in math, there's only one right answer. I believe that the Common Core is really helping us make changes here as they're really enforcing cognitively guided instruction and problem solving and metacognition. We've had to respond to this data to think carefully about what are the instructional practices that will help teachers really know what to do to respond to the kinds of days that their children are experiencing. We did a deep dive into the literature to look for instructional practices that particularly support African American, Latino, and children who come from disadvantaged homes. It fell out into these cultures. We didn't do that on purpose, but obviously every single person in this room knows that you must start with a culture of caring, that it's foundational to children, that they have the opportunity to feel safe and valued in order to optimize their learning. They must also feel competent. They must be successful, contributing members of their classroom. And finally, they must truly experience excellence. We have relegated this population of children to minimal competencies for the last 15 years with the aid of No Child Left Behind, and it's time that we really let them become the excellent students that they can become. This is our mandate. We have to address the inconsistencies and ensure that children, especially these boys, have the respect and quality education that they deserve. We need to provide the teachers with the support they need to gain the knowledge and the ability to do two important things: be nice and let the children talk. I ask you to consider your role in helping this happen.
Well, I appreciate all these presentations. It gives us a lot to think about, does it not? A really rich array of thinking about what's going on in our early childhood programs across the whole spectrum here. So I'm going to kick off our conversation with a fairly broad question, but like to hear what you have to say. And I started off framing this that we have a problem with preschool instruction in our country, and I'd like to hear from each of you, in what ways do you think it is that preschool classrooms are tending to fall short of what it takes to prepare kids for success in school and in later life? What are the key things where you think programs and teachers and classrooms are falling short of the goal?
I think the reason why we ended up doing the work we did in Boston was because we saw that the level of professional development and support for teachers, we talked about this a little bit yesterday about how long teachers have been in the field, and is the professional development and what we're doing to support them really connected to their needs, or to the fact that we have to do first aid every year and we need to do the mandate, the requirements of our regulatory systems. And so they do the same training because it's required, but does it really tie to quality in the preschools? And we know that they need the support in order to take them to the next level. And so it's not that you just hand them a creative curriculum gold, or you hand them the OWL or the building blocks and say, okay, we've trained you in it for 2 days, and now go forth and do what you need to do, because the translation of it looks different from classroom to classroom, from building to building. So the coaching and mentoring piece is key. The feedback sessions, the ability to be able to help them to frame their common planning time, to use it effectively so that it becomes peer-to-peer. But there has to be some consistency over time to give them the support in order to see how it rolls out. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
So I'm just going to quote Sharon's words and say that I think that that we still see that the being nice and letting children talk is an area in which we see kind of fall short. And my evidence to that, not only going out and watching in preschool classrooms, but this kind of ability for me now to kind of drop in via video that students are submitting. The students' interactions tend to be okay. They know enough to be kind, I think, in those interactions that they're on the video. But I was talking to Sharon this morning, we actually have heard some pretty alarming things in the background noise that makes us think that being kind to children is still something that we really want to make sure is in the water in the programs, because we'll hear things and we'll even have to give feedback and say, okay, I'm going to talk about your interaction, here's your strengths. I want to talk about what I hear in the background, because I want you to know that that's not a high quality interaction, that's not an emotionally supportive interaction, that's not a positive climate. So I would still say that's a big part of where we want to focus.
I think that we just have to help teachers question practices that have just been habits for way too long. I'll just talk about the arbitrary rules of crisscross applesauce, walk with your hands behind your back, silent lunches. And then how do you really help teachers focus on who gets in trouble for breaking those rules? What happens to them in terms of having their cards turned, missing recess, not going to the ice cream party, their grandmother is going to be called. And what we're really trying to do is improve their school experiences, their minute-by-minute experiences, so that they know that they belong in school. And when you go home, and that's been your experience, and you tell your mom or your dad or your uncle or your grandmother what happened to you, and we wonder why the parents of these children are not coming into our schools. If my kid came home and told me that, I wouldn't go visit that school either. We really have to think about what happens to these kids every single day.
So I want to talk about financing the change and getting from here to there. So what does it really cost to develop a great preschool teacher? How should we be thinking about that? And what does it cost to help them maintain and grow their skills across time? I know the early reading first projects that invested a lot in the development of teachers had some pretty shocking price tags attached to them that, frankly, as a state administrator type person, scare me. And so I would love your thoughts in thinking about this, about how much does it cost to help develop a really high quality teacher, and how ought we be financing that or building that into how we finance our early education system in this country?
So I'm sitting here with the numbers in front of me because, like you know, I do work for Jason Sachs, and this is what we do. It costs $245 per year per child over the course of about 3 years. This is including the cost of mentor fees, the supplies and materials, the funds for other fees like the annual reports, other expensive. It even averages down to 47 mentor hours per classroom and $73 to pay. We pay $73 per hour for mentors. We use outside consultants to do some of this work. Well, 15 of us can't do it. It takes 3 years to go through the process. So we're talking about $245 per year per child. So that comes down to $7,500 a year per pupil, which is the cost of setting up a classroom, transportation, I mean, the whole enchilada. So when we talk about running a K-1 preschool classroom in Boston Public School, it comes out to $7,500 a year.
And you say it takes 3 years to go through the program, but I assume that continued coaching and mentoring has to be part of your menu as you go on. It's not one process and done.
So, in order to, we're moving faster than we ever thought. And so our capacity to keep on growing in the level that we're growing, now we're doing coaching and mentoring for all the kindergarten teachers around the new curriculum, and now Jason tells us we're moving to first and second grade, and there's 15 of us, and we're writing the curriculum, so our heads are spinning. And so what we did this year is that we're differentiating coaching and mentoring dependent on the need of both the classrooms and the schools. And so we're looking at it in a very different model for next year in terms of the types of support that we can afford to give folks after they've gone through the process of accreditation. They still need us to be there, but we can't be there once a week like we were doing when we were going through the process of gaining accreditation or going through their first year of rolling out a new kindergarten curriculum. So we've had to rethink how we're going to be able to utilize our resources at hand to do the coaching and mentoring that without being able to increase the number of people doing it in terms of how the work is increasing. So it's going to be lessons learned for this year.
Okay, so if you were leading a state quality rating and improvement system, where would you focus your energies and resources in trying to bring improvements in classroom instruction to scale across your state? Where would you focus your energies?
I do it, Sharon tells me, so she said I should talk. So, no surprise, I would like to see some of those efforts around higher education, to transforming higher education. So when, as early learning providers, current early learning providers are wanting to improve to gain their degrees, to improve their, going up in the quality levels, sorry, I'm not being very articulate, that degree matters. So to also kind of stave off some of the additional costs of kind of remediating a teacher that came out of a higher education program that didn't know anything that was current, relevant, or effective. And so Thanks for the pattering of applause. So I would, and I think that there's a lot of efforts around coaching, and I think that we're doing coaching in higher education, and we're able to see these in really short time, some gains in the skills and teacher-child interaction, as well as their ability to provide feedback to each other, to reflect, to question their practices, sometimes even just to name that practice. I would love to see the way that we do coaching to have kind of that same kind of short-term gains in it. And so we're also looking at ways that we can invest in coaching and move them along in some of these kind of rubrics, providing feedback to coaches around their coaching feedback, just like we do in higher education. I think will maximize the kind of the potency of that.
Okay, I'd like to, oh, sorry. I'd like to open up for questions from the audience about what your thoughts or questions or what you're doing in your states and communities around this issue of improving the quality of instruction in preschool classrooms across your states. So it's hard for me to see into the lights here whether we have somebody who is actually asking a question.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment to Sharon Rinchie. As a parent of a Black son, thank you. Thank you so much for taking this initiative to move this forward, because this is a huge issue. And so, kudos to you and your team. This is very meaningful work, and I look forward to see where it goes.
Thank you so much.
So I'm in the middle, and my name is Jocelyn. I'm from New York, and again, I also wanted to echo your thank you to the panel and to Build for allowing us to start talking about connection. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of communicating and not enough connecting, and teachers and administrators, providers don't know how to connect to the children that are walking into those rooms. So we do need to start talking about and continue the conversations and the dialogue about how to support the providers and the teachers and the administrators so that we can connect with them when we may not necessarily understand how they grow up or the communities they come from, their races, their values, their traditions. And I was fortunate enough to attend Sharon's session on improving the pre-K to third grade experience of African American, Latino, and low-income children. And one of the things that she talked about is whether or not we really believe that every child walking into that classroom can learn. And I think we've got to start assessing and asking those questions. I'm not sure how to assess it. I'm not sure how we begin to gauge a person's attitude when they come into this field. Because it's one thing to be passionate about this work, but it's another thing to know that every single child, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, really can learn. And I would love for us to continue having discussions about undoing racism in a platform such as this, because when we start talking about race is when we really begin to change early childhood.
Comment on that, and the thing is, like, we have to, what do teachers need to be doing? Well, they need to be nice, and they need to let children talk, and they need to know what they're helping children learn. And they have to be clear about that and have high expectations for every child who's in their care. Doing things in a developmentally appropriate way is not at odds with ensuring that children develop the skills and competencies that they need. It's both and having rich content, having rich curriculum, appropriate experiences for young kids, and warm and nurturing environments that are respectful of young children and involving of their parents within the classroom community and the school community. It is all of those, and any one of those components that's missing from it is an injustice that we're doing to children.
Good, it's on. Hi, I'm Jan Fish, and I'm from Cal State Northridge in the ECE Master's Program, where for the last 16 years we have a course called Partnerships for Excellence that brings together selected master's students in ECE with mentors who are volunteers, grand dames, they've all been women so far, in early childhood who have been in the field for 30 to 50 years, who volunteer to work with the student for a whole year, and they form a 2-person team that provides free consultation to a child development center in the San Fernando Valley, as far down as Glendale, and for a whole year, working with the director and the staff. We've found great gains in terms of students' real sense of not only learning about coaching and mentoring, but also really deeply understanding what's the difference between being an individual student and turning in a packaged assignment, and a true collaboration, not only with a mentor, but with a director and a staff. So we've seen it as a real professional induction experience for the student between there and the end of the master's degree. I want to thank all of the panelists for your inspiration. And especially, I think I want to look at the companion, the coaching companion, and how it might inform our work, but also the work of cross-sector, across campuses. I also represent the higher ed component of the LA County Early Care and Education workforce, where 14 community colleges and 4 Cal State campuses and 2 private universities are having ECE faculty members at the table monthly to work on this over a course of 5 years. So we're going to follow all of you. Thank you very much.
And I want to say that what we're seeing here is that we have a lot of the resources, materials, things developed to help transform our field. We have things developed to help transform higher education and how we prepare teachers. We have resources developed to help transform how we're thinking about young minority children, low-income children, how we're focusing on them. We have curriculum resources that have been developed. We need to share that information and help us move from what we know to what we do, and doing what we know takes to help young children be prepared for success in school and later life. So I think that I'll turn it back over to Jerry.
What inspiring comments from the panel and from all of you out there as well. I wish we could just keep this conversation going. We've got to stop it now, but let's keep it going throughout the rest of this meeting and when we go home as well. So thanks very much to all of you, and thanks to you.